Welcome to today's presentation. Today we'll be covering our engagement side of the house. So the presentation itself is lessen your load with an easier and more effective way to engage patients. My name is Katie Lashy and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Updox, and I'll be kind of taking you through the presentation. Just a quick housekeeping note, you've probably noticed that your phone lines have been muted as we're recording today's event. We will go ahead and send that recording as well as the presentation slides around afterwards. If you did have questions, we'll be taking those at the end of today's presentation. There's a question section right on your GoToWebinar panel where you can type and submit those questions there. I want to take you through a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll start with considering the traditional patient engagement landscape as you've known it for years. So if that's phone calls and mailers and patient portals and all of that good stuff. We'll talk through some of the limitations and the impact on your staff of those limitations. We'll also talk through an easier way to engage patients, a little bit about what makes Updox different as a partner for patient engagement, and then we'll end with a special offer before hopping into questions. Again, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop open your GoToWebinar panel and type and submit them there. So thinking through the harsh realities of traditional patient engagement, between scheduling, appointment reminders, follow-up calls, and payment collection, a huge chunk of your day is spent dedicated to administrative workflows that go along with patient care. So that not only means the paperwork side, which we've kind of helped simplify for our users with the communication piece, which we'll touch on a little bit later too, but also on the patient communication side. And what we've heard is that practices are still spending a ton of time on the phone trying to connect to patients when they're not inside of the practice. You're leaving voicemails, you're not hearing back, and your staff at the end of the day has higher value tasks that they could be focusing on if they weren't inundated with these smaller tasks. The other side of that reality is that the calls that you're spending all of this time making are not being answered by your patients, because in a world where we kind of hide from a ringing cell phone if we don't know or recognize the number, they're putting you through to voicemail. So it can take as many as 3 touches to get a patient on the phone. So basically what you have is a system that doesn't satisfy your staff's needs or your patient's preference. And even beyond that, if you were to get them on the phone, if there's any need to exchange document or do anything aside from just talking, you don't have the tools to make that happen. So the harsh reality is that your staff overall is spending too much time calling patients and they're not answering. Your patients and consumers in general want and expect convenience in the way that consumers are interacting today. And then your staff is overwhelmed. So engagement initiatives with patients aren't a priority because you're dealing with all these administrative tasks. So if we were dreaming up an easier way to manage this critical piece of your day, what would our requirements be? We would obviously want an effective engagement solution to fit into your staff's workflow, because what you don't need is a whole nother new complicated process to learn. It needs to make their day easier, but it also needs to be convenient for patients too, because if we make it as easy as the day is long for your staff, but patients still aren't engaging with you, then we're not effective. And honestly, in the Amazon shopping, online scheduling world that we're living in, convenience is going to be key for those consumers, and at the end of the day, that means your patients. Our Updox engagement solution satisfies both requirements. So from one place, your staff can put down the phone and leverage things like secure text so that they can one-on-one text message to patients. It also facilitates a super easy exchange of attachments. So if you think of forms or images of symptoms, that sort of thing, your patient can send to you and you can send something back to them. You also have broadcast, which makes it easy to get the word out to groups of patients. Appointment reminders, which helps practices eliminate no-shows and create a more predictable schedule. And then hosted forms, which are super easy for your patient to fill out, super easy for your team to send out a link and then file it back to the chart. And then payments. So if you made it easy for your patients to pay their bills, you'd spend less time kind of chasing them around for that piece of it. So with Updox engagement solution, engaging patients has never been easier, and it's also never been more effective. So your staff ends up happier because they're having an easier time with their day-to-day, and your patients are more engaged because you're actually connecting with them in a way that's convenient and appreciated for them. So why text messaging? So This isn't our first foray into text messaging. We've had the ability to help deliver appointment reminders for a couple of years now for our customers. But getting beyond that, there's still the need. So while we might eliminate an hour or so that you might spend calling 60 patients for the appointments in the next upcoming couple of days, you still have that one-on-one need to reach out to patients, or the need to send a message to a group of patients that doesn't necessarily tether to an appointment. And the question when you think about text messaging and it being a more technological kind of step forward than the personalized call, you would wonder what patient populations react to text messaging. So we did some research and found that 97% of Americans are currently using text messaging. And what's more than that, 90% of those texts are read within 3 minutes of receiving them. So think about that compared to the phone process that you're currently using if it takes up to 3 calls to connect that message. At the end of the day, we're using text messaging. Our parents are using text messaging. Our children are using text messaging. It's just a universal way to exchange information in a way that's more convenient and less disruptive to your patients as well. And this change in how patients want to receive communication is actually great news for practices, because it takes a lot less time for your staff to text, and they can do it from the same place that you're already using every day to communicate with external provider type communication. So your patients are satisfied because you've met them where they are. Your staff is satisfied because you're able to communicate faster and an easier and more effective way than with the phone. And then it's also trackable. So you can see messages that have been sent, and you can see the responses, and you can even file those communications to the patient's chart. So if you think about the other side of that, from a phone perspective, if you connect to that patient, you're logging those notes and then putting them into the chart, whereas an exchange of text messages can be easily filed away, so you have that audit trail. And you're no longer limited by attachments, because you and your patients can exchange photos, documents, and videos with PHI in a way that's, again, easy for your staff and easy for the patient. So how does it work? Right from inside of the same kind of centralized inbox that Updox stores all of their information, there's a button that says text message. It's as easy as clicking that button, typing in the patient's name or mobile number, and then sending the message. From there, your patient is going to be asked to authenticate with their date of birth, which is what makes it HIPAA compliant and secure. And then they're able to review the message that you sent to them, and they can even type and respond back to the message that you had sent. And again, this is all 100% HIPAA compliant. The patient has that access to your message at their fingertips and the convenience of their phone, and it was super easy for your staff to go ahead and send that. So it's a new way to communicate with patients. What are some of the early use cases on how it's being used? So far we've heard that practices are using pictures and videos to capture patient symptoms rather than relying on descriptions. So think about dermatology as a specialty. This could go to primary care and pediatrics as well if there's some sort of rash. Those are the types of things that we've seen from that perspective. It's also really great on the administrative paperwork side. So it's super easy for patients to submit a picture of their insurance card if their insurance is changed. Or you can send out a link to a form or billing items. You can kind of send and receive those documents back and forth. We've also seen it used to send patients educational materials. So around a diagnosis, if you send some supportive educational content after an appointment, that's a really easy use case. You can also send lab results. So obviously, if a lab came back abnormal, you're not going to want to send them a text message letting them know that. That's not very personal. It's probably a little bit scary for the patient. But the other side of that is that probably 50% of those labs are completely within normal ranges. And from a patient's perspective, if it takes you 3 calls to connect to tell them everything's okay, imagine their experience and the concern that they might have kind of playing phone tag with you versus the ability to receive a secure text message that kind of puts their mind at ease. We've also seen it used to the same token, sending medical records as an attachment so that the patient can bring that on with them as well. You can also alert patients when urgent follow-up care is required. So let's say something does come back abnormal and you wanted to get them back into the office. You probably don't want to drop into a text message that it is abnormal, but you could shoot them a text message and ask them to call the practice to get back on the schedule. And maybe that would drive them to call at a time when it's convenient for them to pick up the phone versus the phone tag that you would start if you were to reach out by phone with that same message. That being said, you can still use traditional patient engagement messages alongside the text, but it would really open up time for you on those cases that are applicable. So we always want to kind of point back to our customers and their experience and what they've thought of the solutions. And Dr. Boucher had mentioned that he'd been impressed with how Updox supported patient engagement. It helps build valuable relationships with patients. It's been great for his practice and those we serve. He's a huge proponent of both the broadcast, one-to-many messaging that we're going to talk about here in a moment, as well as the one-on-one secure texting. So broadcast. So this is a way to communicate a message to groups of patients. Now that group could be 5 patients that no-showed or canceled their appointments last week. It could be your entire patient panel because you're trying to drive people to an immunization clinic or end-of-year physicals type thing. So whatever you define as that group of patients, it's a singular message delivered to multiple patients at the end of it. And the way that we see this being used is to drive revenue. So if you drive patients to your practice to increase reimbursement, so think about chronic care management, getting those patients through the door, immunizations, physicals, backfilling appointment slots. It's a great tool to help drive revenue to your practice. It's also great for staff satisfaction because it saves your staff the hours on the phone that they would be taking to chase down patients. I know that I actually just got a call from our pediatrician this week that they have to reschedule my children's appointments a week out. So that means that they probably called all 20 to 25 of the appointments that day, trying to get them to call back in so that we could get that appointment scheduled. Whereas if they'd sent a broadcast, they could have saved themselves that hour or so on the phone. There's also patient adherence. So if you think through the ever-shrinking appointment slot that you actually spend with the patient inside of the practice, imagine if you could deliver educational content ahead of the appointment as well as follow-up information afterwards to support that very small window that you actually have in front of the patient. I know that Dr. Boucher had actually had a great use case for this. He was putting HPV vaccination information in front of adolescent patients in his practice so that when they got to the actual appointment, he had a really high opt-in rate for that vaccine because it wasn't the first time that they had heard about it, researched it, and then decided whether or not to do it. He was actually able to give them that leeway so that by the time they got to the appointment, they were able to take action in that way. So patient adherence is huge with this broadcast and the ability to almost campaign to your patients. There's also patient convenience. So just as much as you hate playing phone tag with your patients, they hate playing phone tag with you as well. So if you can deliver a quick and easy message to them without picking up the phone, they're happy not to receive that call too. There's also versatility. So these broadcast messages are able to be sent by phone, text, or email. And if you find yourself sending the same message over and over again, you can actually create a template for it so that it's easy for you to just pick that message and send. You can even schedule that message to be sent at regular intervals too. So think about something as simple as a patient satisfaction survey. If you queued that up to go to all patient appointments from the previous week at the end of the day on Friday, and that would run automatically. So you're not even dedicating the time to administer the survey, you're just reaping the benefits of having that feedback from your patients. So a lot of really powerful ways that you can use this solution. And from the use case perspective, you would deliver the broadcast by typing in the message you wanted to send, choosing the list of patients that you wanted to send it to, and you can create those lists one at a time, or you can segregate your patient base by age, gender. We also group them by appointments in certain amounts of time. So we tried to think through a few different patient populations that you'd probably want to group up to get you started, but you can even ad hoc create them one at a time. And then you just send it out. And if you want to schedule it to send on a recurring basis, you can set that up in the same screen as well. Again, from that same centralized location that you're using for secure texting, potentially electronic faxing, appointment reminders, all of that stuff, it's funneling into the same application so that all of your workflows are consolidated and you have a much cleaner day. From the patient's perspective, this is a look at what that text might look like. And this is actually perfect example because I think this is along the lines of Dr. Boucher's use case where he had let you know about the HPV vaccine so that the patient could research ahead of time to kind of drive adoption of that. How is it being used specifically? Tailored messaging. So you can distribute information to your staff, patients, and referral sources using broadcast. This is actually interesting because not only is broadcast available to groups of patients, but you can also use it for groups of contacts. So let's say you have referral sources that you want to stay in front of because you're a specialist. You can send a monthly message out to those referral sources thanking them for their business and kind of closing the loop that way. If you're on the primary care side and you're sending a message to referrals, maybe that message serves as a way to stay in front of them so that you can make sure they're closing the loop and sending you the results back at the end of the day. You're also able to deliver education on what to expect ahead of patients' appointments to guarantee an enriching experience. That would be a great nod to what Dr. Boucher was able to do. And then update your database on new services to boost revenue. So let's say you're offering new services in-house, like some pediatricians are doing ear piercing now. That would be a great thing to put out in front of them. And then stay front of mind. So on the relationship side, if you send birthday messages once a month, if you send notices about cancellations due to weather, if you do thank you notes or patient satisfaction surveys after the appointment, those are all very personal ways to use this tool. The last kind of big piece of the engagement solution is appointment reminders. So from a revenue perspective, they help you reduce no-shows, get higher reimbursement because your schedule is full and you have less wasted appointment slots. You also have visibility. So that kind of comes two ways. If you think about server-based practices, you probably don't have access to your schedule unless you're inside of that practice. Updox actually gives you a look at the appointment schedule and whether the appointments have been canceled or confirmed so that anywhere with an internet connection, you have visibility into the status of your schedule. In addition to that, you have the opportunity to backfill appointment slots because you're giving patients the opportunity to confirm or cancel. If you want to, you can turn that off. But by giving them the opportunity to confirm or cancel, you can see a no-show coming and potentially backfill that appointment slot. So a ton of visibility when it comes to this particular product. From a staff satisfaction perspective, your staff spending less time on the phone, so they're less frustrated by chasing down patients. They can spend time on higher value tasks. Personalization, we actually offer the functionality to tailor those messages by appointment type. So if you have surgery and they need to fast for 24 hours ahead of time, you can include that in the message for all surgical reminders. If you needed someone to bring all of their prescriptions to an annual physical, you could include that for all appointment types of physical. You can also mention the location in that reminder, so practices that serve at a few different locations. If you wanted to say Hilliard, Ohio versus Dublin, Ohio, for instance, we support that as well. And again, it's super convenient for patients. I mean, in a consumer-driven world, we are used to being reminded over and over again about appointments. Convenience is key when it comes to scheduling and the ability to move that appointment slot around. So less phone tag is just as helpful for the patient as it is for your practice. From a versatility perspective, you do have the opportunity to do phone call, text message, or email appointment reminders. And on the phone call basis, we have human text option or human voice options available. So you could have a person's voice recorded delivering that. We also are able to support foreign languages as far as those reminders go. So just a really versatile solution when it comes to reminders. I know that reminders have been around for a little bit longer, so everyone kind of has an expectation there, but we really have tried to go deep into functionality to make sure that you have the best solution out there for that. I had mentioned that with reminders, you have visibility into the schedule outside of the four walls of the practice. So here's the reminders dashboard. And if a patient were to cancel their appointment, we're going to proactively notify you in the kind of centralized inbox so that you can take action from there. Maybe you shoot them a text to get them back on the schedule. Maybe you text your wait list to get one of them in that patient's place on the schedule. but you also have the opportunity to open up the dashboard and have a broader look at the appointment schedule anywhere with an internet connection. So you're able to see what reminders have gone out and what the outcome has been. There's actually a slick reporting component to this too, so that if you set it up to do a phone call, text message, and email to start out, and you realize that your patients are more responsive to text messaging, which they probably will be, you could go back and double down on text messages later, because you do get up to 3 reminders for each appointment if you wanted to take advantage of them. So a really nice feature there. How are reminders being used? Eliminating redundant work done by your staff. They're not spending the time on the phone. They're not writing the postcards. You reduce no-shows, create a predictable schedule, and you keep your wait list at bay. You have more visibility into the schedule without being inside of the practice. And you also allow for cancellations and confirmation within the reminder, so your patients are actually interacting with the messages that you're sending to them to provide that visibility to you. And again, it is a customizable solution, so if you wanted to turn off those interactive features, you do have the opportunity to do that too. So that's kind of an overview of what the Updox Engagement solution kind of opens up in terms of what workflows your patients, your practice staff can gain when interacting with those patients beyond what they're used to with the phone and the postcards and a portal that they can't remember the password to. That engagement solution is actually a piece of our collaboration platform as a whole. So what we strive to do as a partner and what kind of sets us apart is that we provide one place to log in to manage those patient engagement type activities alongside your external communications. So think about that as faxing with outside providers, direct messaging for outside providers, all of those different things into one place. And then the real differentiator is how productive you can be inside of that centralized inbox. So you have patient engagement, making it easier and faster for your staff to communicate with patients. You have communication, which is consolidating all communications externally from one place where it's easy to prioritize, personalize, route, and we'll take a look at that. And then you have your productivity piece, which makes it easy for you to take action on all of those things from the same place. So we're bringing communication both from a patient perspective and a provider perspective into one place, and then we have all these great tools that make it really easy for you to act upon them. So we'll take a quick look at that. From a communication perspective, we do offer electronic fax, which helps cut costs and time spent on manual processes. Messenger, which is a new solution that helps practices, it's internal collaboration. So if you think about let's say an appointment arrives, the nurse takes them back, and then the nurse tracks down the doctor to let them know that the patient has arrived and they're in a room, whatever. Messenger would give you a way to quickly message the doctor with that same type of message. It's also going to be searchable. So if you have kind of tribal knowledge where Susie knows this, but Ellen doesn't know that, if Ellen asks within a messenger group, you'd be able to search and find that later on. So if she ever needed that answer again, or if you're training a new hire, there's a collective knowledge that you can use from that perspective. We also have direct messaging and secure email within the communication suite. So whether you're satisfying macro MIPS because we're tethered or we're your partner to the EHR for that solution, or if you're just trying to use secure email to connect to providers who also have direct secure email addresses, we have that available to you as well. From a productivity perspective, we have that centralized inbox that I keep pointing to as the place where all of your documents are going to land and where you can take action from a patient engagement perspective too. So you're accessing all of those things from one place, one window. It's web-based, HIPAA compliant, and you can access it anywhere with an internet connection, so super powerful there. We also have a directory. So the direct secure email addresses that you've always wondered what your referral sources or the members of your care team, how do you get those? There hasn't been like a phone book for that. So aside from calling and asking them what their direct secure email addresses would be, you'd have no way to know that. So it's hard to reach those macro MIPS requirements, and it's hard to get around faxing if that's the only way that you can communicate. Well, the directory is the phone book kind of that's been missing in that way. It's easy access to 1.2 million providers' secure email addresses. You can search by specialty, you can search by city, state, you can search by practice name, and you can find those direct secure email addresses and exchange super easily. We also have workflow, which we'll show. So we have the ability to pre-sort faxes based on the fax number they're coming to. So if you have different fax numbers for different locations or different fax numbers for different groups of staff within your practice, you have the ability to sort things so that you can have a more organized workflow, and also just touch them once because you can kind of take action two ways, which we'll go over here in a moment. Again, we have Messenger as a part of productivity because it saves you that chase. And then we also have document editing and signing, so it's super easy to manage documents without bringing them back to paper. So we talk to practices a lot of the time that have moved to a digital solution, but they're bringing it back to paper if anything needs to be edited, or if they get 3 patients from one lab and one fax type thing. So we have the ability to break that apart really easily. Now, I had mentioned that we offer one workflow to support external communication and patient engagement, and this is where the patient engagement really collides with external communication, because if you think about the types of documents that you're receiving, it's tethered to a patient's care at some point in the process. So maybe it's a referral that's coming ahead of the patient. Maybe it's the outcome from a consult that you had requested coming back in from that patient. At the end of the day, though, the patient probably needs to be looped into that as well. So what we hear is that practices have Post-its or a checklist for the things that they need to do from a patient perspective, or maybe they do notes inside of the EMR, or maybe they have sticky notes digitally on their computer, but it's a completely separate process from the management of the actual document that's coming in. So what the centralized inbox lets you do is access all documents inside of one place. You're able to sort them, and you'll see here on my screen, you're able to quickly mouse over to kind of determine what your next steps might be so that you can take action. You're also able to open up a document. So let's say you needed to edit the document. You could essentially click on the little thumbnail preview from there. So what we're showing you here is the tagging functionality. So in addition to workflow queues pre-sorting faxes, you also have these tags that almost serve as folders or organizational systems. So the way that we see these used would be if you're designating priority, if you're specifying what type of document, if you're assigning ownership to whoever needs to follow up on this. Those would be all really common use cases, and you can label them accordingly. That way, if you have 3 people triaging incoming communication, all 3 of you don't need to come to the same conclusion that at the end of the day it's Ash that needs to take care of this specific document. And then if you got to the point where you needed to take action on it, you would just mouse over the thumbnail preview, click on it, and then that opens our editor, which lets you mark up a document. You could digitally sign. You can also pick and choose your pages really easily, because each of those thumbnail previews serves as a standalone document. So if you needed to send pages 2 and 3 to one patient and 4 and 5 to another patient, it's super easy to do that too. So those are just a couple pieces of the productivity solution. The last piece of the productivity solution is our sending screen, which allows you to take multiple actions at once. So let's say you have a document that you need to fax more than one place. You can keep typing in additional fax numbers, and we'll provide a custom cover sheet for you as you're sending those out. Let's say you're faxing a document out, like a consult, for instance, and you also need to notify the patient and send that the patient's way. You'd be able to send that message to the patient. You'd be able to fax it out simultaneously. And as you do that, you could also file a note to the patient's chart saying that you had done those things, so that the patient's chart remains the system of record. And what all of this serves to do is say that when a document comes in and you need to loop the patient in, you're doing all of that workflow from one place rather than separate systems and multiple sticky notes, etc. So just a quick look at our communications and kind of productivity pieces. I know that engagement's kind of the forefront of today's presentation, but the way that they all tie together is really what does set us apart as a partner. So we had recently surveyed, we were at MGMA about a week ago, and we had the opportunity to speak with 250 different administrators at medical practices and really dig into what's challenging for them, what's front of mind as an area of improvement. And what they had said was frustrated staff, and they had mentioned staff productivity, and they had mentioned elimination of manual processes as like really powerful things that if we could change those, we would really be helping them out, which was interesting to me, because if you think about how those 3 concepts kind of tie together, if you're doing a lot of manual processes, you probably don't feel productive as a staff. And if you don't feel productive as a staff, you probably have trouble with satisfaction. So what we kind of help practices do is streamline some of those manual, redundant processes. While doing so, we're empowering patients in their care because we're engaging them in a more effective way. We're also leveraging those patient engagement solutions to generate more revenue for your practice. And then on the communication and productivity side, we're driving positive provider relationships too, because you're able to be more responsive to those networks because you're less bogged down by those administrative tasks. So by consolidating those provider and patient workflows into a single collaboration platform, we do give you one place to manage all of those external communications and patient engagement and really offset the concerns about manual process, productivity, and satisfaction for your staff. So we do have a special offer for attendees today. If you wanted to get started with our engagement solution before October 31st, so Halloween, you're welcome to take advantage of a 25% off discount on the base fee. I do not actually have the ability to disclose pricing on the line because I'm not on the sales side of the house, but we will have our team following up after today's presentation to make sure we can get you quotes and dig a little bit deeper into some of the pinch points at your practice and the problems that you're trying to solve to see if we would be able to help you offset some of that burden. So I'm going to go ahead and hop into questions here. I have a question about a translation functionality for different languages. So we have the ability to designate the language for a patient for those types of messages. And then you also have pre-recorded scripts and customizable scripts to deliver those messages in the foreign languages. And those would be human voice outside of, I think English and Spanish are built into the product, and then we can do custom recordings for other languages. I have a question, how would this work for an EMR that is not one that Updox interfaces with? So that's a great question. We do have several different layers of integration, and we also have custom integration available. So we have practices using us alongside of their EMR. We have practices that are using us with deep integration into their EMR. We'd have to talk about that kind of on a one-off basis, but we do have custom integration available. We also have a really easy file uploader. So if you were to upload a patient list or a patient schedule, we'd be able to provide all of that functionality right off the bat. But if we did want to go a little bit deeper, we could absolutely discuss that. And we do have about 150 plus EMR partners at this point, I believe. So there's probably some layer of connectivity there as well. Another question about integration. And then we have a specific question about texting. So is there a functionality that lets you know if a text has been read or opened? I do believe that is on the enhancement list for that solution, which would mean, and since it is a new solution that we're talking about every day around here, I would expect to see that in the next month or so coming out, because that's definitely a hot item there. I have a question about HIPAA compliance when it comes to the secure text. So the fact that you're authenticating with your date of birth is what makes that HIPAA compliant and secure. I have a question about the limits when it comes to messaging. So we are, from a solutions perspective, we offer unlimited usage on our patient engagement components as well as our communication component. So rather than thinking through how many fax pages you're using on a daily basis, we try to focus on the value that we're delivering. So we would be able to offer unlimited faxing on that side. And then on the patient engagement side, we're also able to offer unlimited secure text, unlimited reminders, and unlimited broadcast messaging. Again, because we're trying to make sure that we're driving value to your practice and saving you time rather than counting usage that way. We would not want you to use something less to avoid a cost. And I think that's all we have for questions. We are 7 minutes over, so I apologize that I talked a little bit longer than I intended. Again, we will be sending the recording around to all registrants after the event. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with me. Our team will be in touch to see if there were any follow-up questions or interest in receiving a follow-up demo or a quote with one of our product experts. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.